The rain poured relentlessly, drumming against the windows of the old Victorian house. Inside, Emily sat in the dimly lit study, her hands trembling as she held the letter. It had arrived that morning, unmarked and unexpected, bearing news that would change her life forever. The letter, written in elegant, flowing script, was from a lawyer she had never heard of, informing her of an inheritance from a distant relative she barely remembered. Emily was a 40-year-old woman who lived a quiet, solitary life in the small town of Willow Creek. She worked as a librarian, surrounded by books and stories that transported her to other worlds. Her life was simple, predictable, and, until that moment, entirely uneventful. But as she read the letter, her heart raced with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The inheritance, the letter stated, included a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, a place she had only heard whispers about in the local lore. The estate, known as Blackwood Manor, had been abandoned for decades, shrouded in mystery and rumored to be haunted. It was said that the last owner, an eccentric old man named Jonathan Blackwood, had lived there alone until his mysterious death. The townsfolk spoke of strange lights and eerie sounds emanating from the manor at night, and no one had dared to venture near it for years. Emily had always dismissed these stories as nothing more than superstition, but now, with the letter in her hands, she wasn't so sure. Despite her initial hesitation, Emily knew she had to visit the manor. The letter had mentioned an urgent need to finalize the inheritance, and she couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity. What secrets did Blackwood Manor hold? Why had Jonathan Blackwood left everything to her, a relative he had never met? With a deep breath, Emily resolved to find out. The next morning, the rain had subsided, leaving the world outside wet and gleaming under the pale sunlight. Emily packed a small bag, unsure of what she would find at the manor, but determined to be prepared. As she drove out of town, the road leading to Blackwood Manor became narrower, the trees thicker, and the air heavier with an unspoken tension. The closer she got, the more isolated she felt, as if she were crossing into another world. Finally, she arrived at the gates of Blackwood Manor. They were tall, wrought iron structures, rusted with age, and almost entirely overgrown with ivy. The gates creaked open with a heavy groan as Emily pushed them, revealing a long, winding driveway that disappeared into the dense forest ahead. She took a deep breath and drove forward, her heart pounding with each turn of the wheels. As the manor came into view, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The house was massive, its once grand architecture now crumbling with decay. The windows were dark, some shattered, and the stone walls were covered in moss and vines. It was a place that had been forgotten by time, yet it still held a sinister beauty that both fascinated and terrified her. Emily parked the car and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath her feet. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. She hesitated at the front door, which was slightly ajar as if inviting her in. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior of the manor was just as eerie as the outside. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners of the room. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something else, something faint but unmistakable, like the lingering presence of someone who had been there long ago. The hallway stretched out before her, lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors, whose eyes seemed to follow her as she moved. Emily's footsteps echoed through the empty house as she explored the first floor. The rooms were filled with old, dusty furniture, all covered in white sheets like forgotten ghosts. She found the library, its shelves filled with books that had not been touched in years, and the dining room, where a massive table stood as if waiting for a feast that would never happen. But it was the grand staircase at the center of the house that drew her attention. It spiraled upwards into the darkness of the second floor, its steps creaking under the weight of time. As she ascended the staircase, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind, seemed to carry a hidden meaning, a secret that the manor was desperate to keep. She reached the top of the stairs and found herself in a long corridor lined with more closed doors. At the end of the hallway was a single door, slightly ajar, with a soft light glowing from within. Her heart raced as she approached the door. She pushed it open slowly, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, a single candle burned on a table, casting flickering shadows on the walls. And there, in the center of the room, was a large, ornate mirror. The mirror's surface was dusty, but beneath the layer of grime, Emily could see her reflection staring back at her, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She stepped closer to the mirror, compelled by an unseen force. As she wiped away the dust, something strange began to happen. The reflection in the mirror started to change, not just her own reflection, but the entire room behind her. The dusty, decaying room transformed into a lavish, well-lit parlor, and her reflection was replaced by the image of a man who looked eerily familiar. Emily gasped, stepping back in shock. The man in the mirror was Jonathan Blackwood. She had seen his portrait in the hallway downstairs, but here he was, standing in the mirror as if alive. He stared at her with a knowing smile, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made her shiver. "Welcome, Emily," the man in the mirror spoke, his voice soft but commanding. "I've been waiting for you." Emily froze, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. This couldn't be real. Mirrors didn't talk, and dead men didn't come back to life. Yet here he was, speaking to her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Who are you?" Emily managed to ask, her voice trembling. "I am Jonathan Blackwood," the man replied. "And you, my dear, are the last of the Blackwood line. You've inherited more than just this house, Emily. You've inherited the secrets that lie within it." Emily shook her head, trying to make sense of his words. "What secrets? What do you mean?" The image of Jonathan Blackwood flickered in the mirror, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw something else. Another figure standing behind him, shrouded in darkness. But before she could focus on it, the image returned to Jonathan, who was now looking at her with a serious expression. "There are things in this house that you cannot yet understand," he said. "But you will. In time, you will discover the truth about our family, about the curse that haunts us. It is your destiny, Emily." Emily's mind was spinning. A curse? Her destiny? She had come here expecting to deal with lawyers and property, not ancient family curses and talking mirrors. But something in Jonathan's voice, in his eyes, made her believe that he was telling the truth, or at least a version of it. "What curse?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan sighed, his image in the mirror flickering once more. "It began many generations ago, with a terrible mistake, a deal made in desperation. Our family has been bound by that mistake ever since, and the consequences have been dire. You are the last of our line, Emily. It falls to you to break the curse, to set things right." Emily felt a chill run through her. She wanted to protest, to deny what he was saying, but deep down, she felt a connection to this place, to the history that had led her here. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if she had always been meant to find Blackwood Manor, to uncover its secrets. "How do I break the curse?" Emily asked, her voice steadier now. Jonathan's image began to fade, the room in the mirror returning to its decayed state. "You must uncover the truth, Emily, the truth that lies buried in the shadows of this house. Only then can you free yourself, and our family, from the darkness that has plagued us for so long." With those final words, Jonathan's image vanished, leaving only Emily's reflection staring back at her. The room around her was once again cold and silent, the candle on the table flickering weakly before going out altogether. Emily stood there trembling, her mind racing with questions. What had just happened? Was it real, or had her mind played tricks on her? But as she looked around the room, she knew that something had changed. She could feel it, a presence, a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. She left the room and made her way back downstairs, her steps quick and purposeful. The house felt different now, as if it were watching her, waiting for her to make her next move. Emily knew she couldn't leave. Not yet. She had to find out more about the curse, about the secrets that Jonathan had spoken of. But where to start? The library seemed like the most logical place. Emily had always loved books, and she knew that if there were any clues to be found, they would likely be hidden in the pages of one of the old tomes that lined the shelves. She returned to the library and began searching, pulling out books at random and flipping through their pages. Hours passed as Emily combed through the dusty volumes. Many were old histories of the town, family records, and journals written by long-dead Blackwoods. She found references to the estate's construction, tales of its past occupants, and even mentions of strange occurrences, lights in the woods, voices heard in empty rooms. But nothing concrete, nothing that explained the curse or how to break it. Frustration gnawed at her as the sun began to set, Azrinia, casting long shadows across the library floor. Just as she was about to give up for the night, she noticed a small leather-bound book tucked away on a high shelf. It was different from the others, older, more worn. She pulled it down and carefully opened it, the brittle pages crackling as she turned them. The book was a journal, written by someone named Elias Blackwood, who had lived over a century ago. As Emily read, her eyes widened with each entry. Elias had been a young man, desperate to save his dying wife. In his despair, he had turned to dark magic, making a pact with a mysterious figure known only as the Shadow Man. The pact had granted Elias his wish. His wife had been saved, but at a terrible cost. The journal detailed the horrors that followed. Elias's wife had indeed been spared, but she had become something else, something twisted and unnatural. The Shadow Man had claimed their firstborn child as payment, and the curse had been passed down through each generation of the Blackwood family. Every descendant was doomed to suffer, their lives marked by tragedy and loss. Emily's hands shook as she closed the journal. This was the curse Jonathan had spoken of, the curse that she was now bound to. But if Elias had made the pact, there had to be a way to break it. She read on, searching for any mention of a way out. In the final pages of the journal, Elias wrote of his regret, his sorrow for what he had done. He had tried to find a way to undo the pact, to break the curse, but every attempt had failed. The Shadow Man was too powerful, his grip on the family too strong. But there was one clue, one hint of hope. Elias mentioned a key, a physical object that he believed could sever the connection between the Shadow Man and the Blackwood family. He had hidden it somewhere in the manor, but his entries grew more erratic, more desperate, and he never revealed its exact location. Emily knew she had to find this key. It was her only chance to break the curse and free herself from the dark fate that had claimed her ancestors. But where could it be? The manor was vast, with countless rooms and hidden places. Finding the key would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Determined, Emily began her search the next morning. She explored every room, every closet, and every hidden nook and cranny. Days turned into weeks as she scoured the manor from top to bottom, her hope dwindling with each passing day. The key was nowhere to be found, and the more she searched, the more she began to feel the oppressive presence of the Shadow Man, lurking in the corners of her vision, always just out of sight. But Emily refused to give up. She knew that the key was somewhere in the manor, and she had to find it before it was too late. The tension in the air grew thicker with each passing day, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, more alive. Emily could feel the curse closing in on her, the weight of her ancestors' mistakes bearing down on her shoulders. Then, one stormy night, as lightning flashed across the sky and thunder rumbled in the distance, Emily found herself drawn to the old chapel on the edge of the estate. She had avoided it until now, unnerved by the stories she had heard about the strange rituals that had taken place there. But something pulled her towards it, a feeling deep in her gut that told her the key was there. The chapel was small, its wooden walls creaking with age. The air inside was cold, and the smell of damp earth filled her nostrils as she stepped inside. The altar at the front of the chapel was covered in dust, and the stained glass windows were cracked and faded. But as she approached the altar, Emily noticed something strange, a loose floorboard, slightly raised above the others. With trembling hands, she pried the board loose, revealing a small ornate box hidden beneath it. Her heart pounded as she opened the box, and there, nestled inside, was the key. It was old, made of heavy black iron, and its surface was engraved with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie light. Emily knew without a doubt that this was the key Elias had written about. She had found it, her only chance to break the curse. But as she held it in her hands, she felt a presence behind her, cold and malevolent. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the shadows, was the Shadow Man. He was tall and gaunt, his face hidden beneath a hood, and his eyes glowed with a dark, unnatural light. He reached out a hand towards her, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. "You've done well, Emily," the shadow man hissed, his voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "But it's too late. The curse cannot be broken." Emily backed away, clutching the key tightly. "You're wrong," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I will break it. I will end this once and for all." The shadow man laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chapel. "Foolish girl," he sneered. "The curse is eternal. It is bound to your blood, to your very soul. You cannot escape it." But Emily refused to believe him. She knew that the key was the answer, that it could sever the connection between the shadow man and her family. With a surge of courage, she ran to the altar and placed the key in the lock of a hidden compartment that Elias had described in his journal. As she turned the key, the shadow man lunged at her, but it was too late. The compartment opened with a blinding flash of light, and a powerful force surged through the chapel, knocking the shadow man back. He howled in rage as the light engulfed him, his form flickering and distorting before he was finally consumed by it. The light spread through the manor, driving out the darkness, purging the curse that had plagued the Blackwood family for generations. Emily collapsed to the floor, exhausted but triumphant. She had done it. She had broken the curse. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the manor changed. The air was lighter, the shadows less menacing. Emily could feel the weight that had pressed down on her lifting, and for the first time since she had arrived, she felt at peace. She decided to stay at Blackwood Manor, to restore it and make it her home. It was a place of history, of family, and now, of hope. As she looked out over the estate, the sun setting in the distance, she knew that she had fulfilled her destiny. The curse was broken, and the shadows that had once haunted her were gone. Emily smiled, knowing that she had finally found her place in the world. And as she walked through the halls of the manor, she knew that she would never be alone. The spirits of her ancestors were at rest, and the darkness had been banished. Blackwood Manor was hers, and it was filled with light.